My name is Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, and this is my story. My story begins long before I ever knew the weight of a crown. I was born into a world of power, privilege, and destiny, a child of royalty, yes, but also the son of a man whose name echoed across the land. My father, David, the warrior king, the poet, the man after God's own heart. He was a giant in every sense, his victories in battle, his unmatched devotion to God, his songs that could soothe the most troubled souls. But to me, he was simply my father, and from my earliest days, I felt the weight of his legacy pressing upon me. In his shadow, I learned the meaning of strength, of kingship, of faith. His stories shaped my understanding of what it meant to lead. I knew the tales well, how he stood against Goliath with nothing but a sling and his trust in the Lord, how he unified the tribes of Israel under one banner, how he brought the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem dancing with joy before our God. But beneath that glory there was pain. I was born of Bathsheba, the woman whose name still carried whispers. My mother's story was one of love, loss, and controversy, and yet through her, I was destined for the throne. My father's house was one of both greatness and turmoil, his victories tempered by moments of deep personal failure. And as a child, I learned that leadership carried both glory and consequence. Still, from the beginning, I knew one thing. I was chosen. Chosen by my father, yes, but more importantly, chosen by God. I was being groomed for something greater than myself. Little did I know that the path to the throne would be paved with betrayal and blood. As my father's strength faded, so did the unity in his house. Adonijah, my older brother, saw an opportunity. He was strong, handsome, and charismatic, everything a king should be. In his mind, the throne was already his, and why shouldn't it be? He was, after all, the natural heir. He gathered his supporters, threw feasts, and crowned himself king in everything but name. It could have been the end of my story, the end of God's plan for me. But the Lord had other intentions. My mother, Bathsheba, ever watchful, ever wise, saw the threat clearly. She came to my father as he lay weak on his bed, reminding him of the promise he had made, that I, Solomon, would be king after him. With her courage and the intervention of the prophet Nathan, the truth prevailed. My father, though near death, still held the power to anoint a king. He called for me, his youngest, and in the presence of his loyal followers, declared that I would sit on the throne of Israel. But securing the throne was only the beginning. My brother's ambitions could not be ignored, and the whispers of rebellion grew louder. Adonijah, in his pride, could not accept the will of God or my father. He conspired, even after my coronation, seeking to undermine me. The courts were filled with intrigue, betrayal lurking behind every corner. And so I did what was necessary. Adonijah, my own flesh and blood, had to be dealt with. The kingdom demanded stability, and his challenge to my authority could not be allowed to fester. The crown comes with a price, and the price is often steep. The struggle for power is not for the faint-hearted, and in those early days, I learned the brutal reality of kingship. Justice and survival often walk hand in hand. My father's final days were filled with quiet wisdom. His voice, once so commanding, had softened, yet his words carried the weight of a lifetime of experience. I knelt by his side, knowing that soon he would be gone, and it would all be mine. The crown, the kingdom, the responsibility. "Be strong," he said to me, his eyes sharp despite his frail body. "Show yourself a man. Walk in the ways of the Lord your God and follow his statutes." These were his last instructions, his final plea. He spoke not of wealth nor power, but of righteousness. He reminded me that kingship was more than a throne. It was a covenant with the Almighty. A king, he said, must be a servant of the people, a protector of justice, and above all, a man who walks humbly with his God. And then the inevitable happened. David, the giant, the man after God's own heart, passed from this world. In that moment, Israel mourned, and the weight of the kingdom fell fully on my shoulders. I was king now, but more than that. I was a son without a father. The days that followed were not easy. The kingdom was vast, the people many, and though I was young, I knew I had to make my mark. There were still enemies within my own house. Joab, my father's general, a man of blood and ambition, remained a threat. Shimei, who had cursed my father in his time of need, also stood against me. Justice demanded that these men be dealt with, and so they were. I learned early that mercy has its limits, that leadership sometimes requires hard decisions. My father had built a great kingdom, but I would need to secure it with my own hand. The throne is never truly safe, not until the last whisper of rebellion is silenced. With my father's wisdom echoing in my heart, I stepped fully into my role as king. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The real test had yet to come. The question was not whether I could rule, but whether I could rule with the wisdom of God, the justice of David, and the strength of a king. Little did I know, the path ahead would demand more of me than I ever imagined. In the quiet of the night, as I stood alone on the palace balcony gazing over the sprawling city of Jerusalem, I felt the weight of the crown pressing down on me. I was young, too young perhaps, and yet here I was, king over a vast nation, the son of the great David. But no amount of royal blood could drown out the gnawing fear within me. How could I in my youth lead a people so great, a people chosen by God himself? The responsibility was overwhelming, like a storm cloud hovering over my head, dark and heavy. I felt unworthy, unprepared for the sheer magnitude of it all. This kingdom stretched far beyond what I could see, and the decisions I would have to make seemed like towering mountains I had no strength to climb. I knew then that I could not rely on my own wisdom. I needed something greater than myself. And so I went to Gibeon, the place where my father had often worshipped, and I offered sacrifices to the Lord. 1,000 burnt offerings I laid upon the altar. I was not seeking glory or favor from the people. This was between me and God. It was an act of surrender. In that moment, I wasn't Solomon the king. I was simply Solomon, a servant of the Almighty pleading for guidance. My heart bowed low, seeking the face of the one who had established my father's kingdom. And that night, as I slept, something extraordinary happened. The Lord appeared to me in a dream. His voice, oh, how can I describe it? It was like thunder wrapped in peace, a presence that filled my soul with awe. He asked me, "What shall I give you?" It was a question that shook me to my core. Anything. He offered me anything. Power, riches, long life, victory over my enemies. It was all within my grasp, yet none of it seemed important. In that divine moment, I knew what I needed most. I spoke, my heart trembling with sincerity. "O Lord my God," I said, "you have made me king in place of my father David. But I'm only a little child. I do not know how to carry out my duties." My voice faltered as I admitted my inadequacies. How could I lead this people, this vast, numerous people, without the wisdom to do so? And so I asked not for wealth or power, not for long life or the death of my enemies. I asked for understanding. I asked for a discerning heart to govern, to know right from wrong. "Give your servant wisdom," I said, "that I may lead your people in righteousness." There was a silence, a holy pause, as though all of heaven waited for God's reply. And then his voice came again, filled with approval and grace. "Because you have asked this," he said, "and not for long life or riches, nor for the death of your enemies, but for wisdom to administer justice, I will grant your request." But he didn't stop there. No, he went further. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, such as none has had before you, and none shall have after you. And I will also give you what you did not ask for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime no king will compare to you. My heart could hardly contain the wonder of it. I had asked for wisdom, and in his goodness, God had granted me not only wisdom, but wealth, honor, and long life. It was as if the doors of heaven had opened, pouring out blessings I had never imagined. My future was changed in an instant, and though I could not foresee all that would come, I knew that from that moment on, my reign would be marked by God's divine favor. It wasn't long before the first great test of my wisdom came. 2 women were brought before me, weeping and shouting. They stood before my throne, both clutching the same baby, each claiming to be its mother. The tension in the room was palpable. Each woman told her story, and yet there was no way to know who spoke the truth. One child had already died in the night, and now both women laid claim to the living infant. The court waited for my judgment. The people's eyes were upon me, but I remained calm. This was what I had asked for: the wisdom to discern justice, the clarity to see beyond mere words and into the truth. I stood from my throne and issued a command that shocked everyone. "Bring me a sword." The guards hesitated for a moment but quickly obeyed. I could see the unease in their eyes, but I held firm. "Cut the living child in 2, I declared, "and give half to each woman." Gasps filled the room. Surely no one could have expected such a decree. The air grew thick with tension, and the 2 women stood frozen. Then it happened. The true mother's love broke through. She cried out, "No, my lord! Give her the living baby! Do not kill him!" Her heart could not bear to see her child harmed, even if it meant losing him. In that moment, the truth was revealed. I smiled and spoke with assurance. "Do not harm the child. Give the baby to the first woman. She is the mother." The court erupted in awe and praise. My wisdom had pierced through the deception, and justice was done. From that day forward, word of this judgment spread throughout the land. My people marveled at the wisdom God had bestowed upon me. They saw not only a king, but a man who had been given understanding straight from the throne of heaven itself. With wisdom I ruled justly, but soon the call of a greater task awaited me, a task that would solidify not just my reign, but Israel's place in the world. It was time to build a house for the Lord, a temple like none had ever seen before. My father David had a dream, a vision that burned in his heart all his life. He longed to build a house for the Lord, a place where God's presence would dwell among his people. But it was not for him to do. God had made it clear David was a man of war, a man whose hands were stained with blood, and it would fall to me, his son, to bring this vision to life. The task of building God's holy dwelling place, a temple to the Almighty, was mine. The weight of this responsibility was more than just the construction of stone and cedar. It was the fulfillment of a promise, a sacred covenant between God and Israel. This temple would not merely be a building, it would be the heart of our nation, the dwelling place of the Most High. It would stand as a symbol of God's favor, a reminder that we, his chosen people, were set apart for his glory. I could feel the urgency in my soul, the divine calling to finish what my father had begun. This would be more than a monument. It would be the center of worship for generations to come, the place where sacrifices would rise like incense to the heavens, where Israel would seek the face of God, and where the Ark of the Covenant would finally find its home. The time had come. I would make Jerusalem not only the political capital of Israel, but also the spiritual heart of the entire nation. This temple would stand as a beacon, not only to my people, but to the nations around us, declaring that the God of Israel dwells among us. But such a vision could not be built by dreams alone. I needed resources, materials, labor, and alliances. The land of Israel, though rich in spirit, lacked the resources needed for such a grand undertaking. But God, in His wisdom, had already provided me with what I needed, relationships forged not through war, but through diplomacy. I turned to Hiram, the king of Tyre, a friend to my father and now a friend to me. Hiram's kingdom was blessed with the finest cedar in all the world, and he agreed to provide me with the wood needed to build God's house. It was a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. In return, I gave Hiram the grain and oil from our lands, and together we ensured that the finest materials would be used to build a house worthy of the Lord of hosts. But it wasn't just the cedar from Lebanon that I needed. I summoned skilled craftsmen from all corners of the world, stone cutters, masons, and goldsmiths, the best of the best, to bring this vision to life. Day and night, thousands of workers labored, chiseling stone, carving wood, and overlaying the temple walls with pure gold. The scale of the project was immense, 7 long years of toil, planning, and careful execution. The gold alone seemed to pour in like rivers, and the beauty of the temple began to take shape. It was adorned with precious stones, intricate carvings of cherubim, palms, and flowers, every detail meticulously crafted to reflect the splendor of the one for whom it was built. The people of Israel marveled at the sight as the walls rose higher, and the Holy of Holies was prepared, a place so sacred that only the high priest would enter, and only once a year. The cost was great, not just in wealth, but in the sheer magnitude of human effort. Yet this was no ordinary building. It was the very dwelling place of God. My heart swelled with pride and awe as I watched it come together, knowing that this temple would stand as a testament to the glory of God and the greatness of Israel for generations to come. And then, at last, the day came. After 7 years of labor, the temple was complete. Its walls shimmered in the sunlight, the gold reflecting the glory of the heavens, and the people of Israel gathered in their thousands to witness its dedication. This was no ordinary ceremony. This was the culmination of a dream, a moment that would forever mark the history of our nation. The Ark of the Covenant, the very symbol of God's presence with His people, was carried with great reverence into the Holy of Holies. The priests, clothed in white, moved with solemn grace, and as the ark was placed within its sacred chamber, a cloud descended upon the temple, a cloud so thick, so overwhelming, that the priests could not stand to minister. The presence of the Lord filled the house in a way that none of us had ever experienced before. It was as if heaven itself had touched the earth. I stood before the people, my heart full, and I raised my voice in prayer. I called upon the Lord, asking Him to hear the cries of His people, to be present in this house we had built for Him. O Lord, our God of Israel, I prayed, there is no God like You, in heaven above or on earth below, keeping covenant and steadfast love with Your servants who walk before You with all their heart. I asked Him to watch over this place, to hear the prayers that would be offered here, to forgive when we repent, and to show mercy when we falter. This was not just a house of stone, it was a house of prayer, a place where the heart of Israel would meet the heart of God. The people stood in awe as I spoke, their faces lifted toward the heavens. This was not merely a dedication, it was a moment of unity, of national pride. We were not just a people ruled by a king. We were a people bound to our God, and this temple was the physical manifestation of that bond. It was a day of joy, of celebration, of sacrifice and worship. Thousands of burnt offerings were made, and the people rejoiced, knowing that the Lord had chosen to dwell among them. And as I looked upon the completed temple, I knew that this was the high point of my reign. Under my reign, Israel entered its golden age. It was a time unlike any other, a time of peace, prosperity, and splendor that stretched across the land like a bright dawn. The wars of my father David were behind us, and I ruled over a kingdom that was united and secure. But it wasn't just peace that defined my reign. It was the wealth, the abundance, the overflowing prosperity, that seemed to pour into Israel from all corners of the earth. Trade flourished in ways that my ancestors could scarcely have imagined. Our merchants sailed the seas and caravans crossed the deserts, bringing with them spices, gold, and treasures from distant lands. The wealth of nations flowed into Jerusalem, and the city became a beacon of greatness. Silver was as common as stones in the streets, and gold adorned everything, from the palace to the temple. The city gleamed, its riches reflecting the glory of the Lord who had blessed us so abundantly. But this prosperity was not by chance. I forged alliances with kings and queens from distant lands, marrying the daughters of powerful rulers to ensure peace and cooperation. These marriages were not just symbols of unity, they were the strategic threads that bound the great powers of the region together in harmony. With each new alliance, Israel's borders grew stronger, and our influence spread far beyond our own territory. Israel was the envy of the world. Our kingdom was vast, our coffers full, and our people content. The land flowed with milk and honey, and I, Solomon, was its shepherd, wise, powerful, and blessed beyond measure. And then she came, the Queen of Sheba. Her name alone stirred intrigue, whispered in royal courts and among the common people alike. She ruled a distant and mysterious land, a place of riches and wisdom. The stories of my wealth, wisdom, and splendor had reached her ears, and she could not resist the journey to see for herself if the tales were true. She arrived with a great caravan, camels laden with spices, gold, and precious stones. Her retinue filled the streets of Jerusalem, and all of Israel marveled at the spectacle. When she entered my court, the air was thick with anticipation. She was a queen of great intellect, and she had come not just to witness my wealth, but to test me. She came with riddles, questions, challenges, each one designed to probe the limits of my wisdom. Yet for every question she posed, I had an answer. For every riddle, a solution. We spoke of matters of the heart, of politics, of philosophy and faith, and each time I spoke, her eyes widened in admiration. She had come seeking wisdom, and she found it, not in books or scrolls, but in the words that God had given me. Days passed, and she marveled not only at my words, but at the opulence of my palace, the organization of my kingdom, and the dedication of my servants. She could scarcely believe her eyes. The reports I heard in my own land, she said, were true, but they did not even tell half of the greatness I see before me. Your wisdom, your wealth, it surpasses everything I could have imagined. Her words were not just a compliment. They were a confirmation that Israel had risen to heights unknown. When the Queen of Sheba finally departed, she left with gifts, blessings, and a bond of respect between our nations. Her visit was not just a moment of personal triumph. It was the pinnacle of Israel's international prestige. The world looked upon my reign with wonder, and my fame spread like wildfire across the lands. But my wealth was not contained to mere treasures. The grandeur of my reign was evident in the works of my hands, the buildings that rose from the earth, the projects that reshaped the very landscape of Israel. After the temple was complete, I turned my attention to my own palace, a place of such beauty and magnitude that it took 13 years to complete. Cedar beams, ivory, and gold filled the halls. I built gardens, terraces, and pools, creating an oasis in the heart of Jerusalem. The palace was not just a home for me, it was a symbol of Israel's dominance, a physical manifestation of the wealth and power we had achieved. The walls of the palace echoed with the voices of ambassadors from foreign lands, dignitaries who came seeking wisdom and trade, offering tribute in exchange for a glimpse into the mystery of Israel's success. But it wasn't just within the borders of Israel that my influence grew. I built a fleet of ships, sending them to distant lands to bring back treasures that increased our wealth tenfold. My ships sailed the Mediterranean, down the Red Sea and beyond, reaching places few had ever seen. They returned with gold, ivory, exotic animals, and spices. Every port they entered knew the name of Solomon, and every shore they touched felt the weight of Israel's power. Scholars, philosophers, and kings came from the ends of the earth to sit at my table. They marveled at the vastness of my knowledge. Mathematics, science, poetry, the mysteries of the natural world. I spoke of the cedar trees of Lebanon and the hyssop that grows out of the wall. I understood the ways of the wind, the movement of the stars, and the order of the animals. The wisdom that God had granted me made me a beacon to the world, and in my presence, the nations sought counsel and alliance. But even in the midst of this golden age, something deeper was stirring in my soul. The wealth, the power, the fame, it all began to blur, to twist, to overshadow the simplicity of the wisdom I had once sought. At the height of my reign, I foolishly believed my many marriages to foreign princesses were wise political moves. I sought peace with Egypt, Moab, Ammon, and Sidon, uniting nations through love. But with each bride came the whispers of foreign gods, and slowly, my heart began to drift away from the Lord. My wives longed for the worship of their own gods, so I allowed altars to Ashtoreth, Molech, and Chemosh to rise in Israel. What started as small concessions quickly demanded more of my soul. The people who once looked to me for guidance now saw me faltering, and many followed my misguided path. My heart, once devoted to God, became tainted by idolatry, and I forgot the very covenant that had blessed my reign. As the altars multiplied, the anger of the Lord stirred. A prophet delivered a painful message. Because of my disobedience, my kingdom would be divided after my death. God, in his mercy, would spare this judgment while I lived, but my son would bear the consequences of my sins. The realization struck me hard. My legacy, the empire I had built, would fracture because of my choices. I had become the architect of my own ruin, leading my people away from the God who had blessed us. After a glorious 40-year reign, I, Solomon, met my end, leaving behind a kingdom that was crumbling from within. My son, Rehoboam, inherited not just a throne, but a legacy fraught with challenges. Ignoring the wisdom I once treasured, he imposed harsh burdens on the people, leading to rebellion. 10 tribes broke away, forming the northern kingdom of Israel, while only Judah remained loyal. My once united empire was now divided, and the seeds of my own failures had grown into a bitter harvest. My legacy is a reminder that wisdom without humility leads to arrogance, and power without righteousness sows destruction. I am Solomon, and this was my story. Now, as you write your own, consider, what will you choose to leave behind? Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more similar stories. Keep your minds open, and until we meet again,